The Pleiadian Mission, A Time of Awareness by Randolph Winters. Part 11. The story of Emmanuel, Yeshua, Jesus. In our search for our identity and our role in cosmic creation consciousness, we humans have created religions and different belief structures in order to explain the reason for our existence. All religions are humanity's attempt at explaining the meaning of life. Throughout our history, the meaning of our lives has been explained through the use of idols, myths, sun gods, bird gods, and countless other man-made philosophies which have reflected the understanding and intelligence of the times. Humanity must learn the lessons of life step by step. We must challenge, discover, and learn for ourselves in order to evolve. The current time in which we are in, often called the New Age, represents a time for a new paradigm in thinking, a time for us to search out the truth for ourselves. We no longer should listen to religions and philosophers as the absolute authority, but instead perceive their words only as information to be used on our own personal path of discovery, or discarded. In our new paradigm, we will learn to take responsibility for our own individual connections to cosmic creation consciousness, and most importantly, we will learn to find truth for ourselves, universal truths. In this era, there will be no need for a spiritual middleman who will tell us what God wants us to do. Instead, we will all learn to discover the inner truth for ourselves and freely share our inner standings with one another. Learning to face the challenges of life and taking 100% accountability for our actions is truly one of the greatest lessons to be learned at this time. The leaders of the future will have to teach this concept through role modeling by example. In ancient times, people thought that gods ruled the earth, but today humanity is on our own to discover our spiritual place in cosmic creation consciousness. In the New Age, humanity is getting in touch with our spirit and finding out we are already and always were part of cosmic creation consciousness. This is strictly the opposite teaching of the Abrahamic religions and quite possibly many other religions as well. We are becoming aware that we are more than just a physical body. We also have a spiritual energy within us, the soul, the spirit, whatever you can call it, which is permanently connected to creation itself. This spirit or soul is an active part of our day-to-day existence that requires a new understanding and appreciation. As we learn more about cosmic creation consciousness, we learn that our spirit has unique powers which include telepathy, telekinesis, future and past visions, and most importantly, the ability to communicate directly with cosmic creation consciousness, as well as other beings of higher consciousness that may be in our dimension or other dimensions. This is going to require new kinds of education, new methods, and new thinking. We are asking questions that the old paradigms cannot answer. The need for a new practical method of understanding our spiritual self and applying it to our day-to-day lives is here. And religion does not have the answers. If we were to look at the average person of 2,000 years ago, it's not hard to see how valuable organized religion was for them. It was a time of chaos, when humanity was badly in need of some kind of organized plan by which they could live their lives. Religion provided this through organizing a logical method of explaining God and the meaning of humanity's life. First, we had the 10 Commandments by which humanity could begin to rule themselves. Here were basic laws of living that everyone could understand and live by. Then, through the life and teachings of the man we came to call Jesus, people began to understand their connection to God and developed a reason for being and felt closer to cosmic creation consciousness. Their lives then became richer and more meaningful. Religion was born when these teachings were put together to form the New Testament. Boop. The Christian religion was born hundreds of years later when these teachings were put together to form the New Testament. Just like in Egypt, where the sun god Ra reflected the understandings of the time, the Christian religion was formed as a reflection of the understandings of its time and the goals of its creators. Now nearly 2,000 years have passed, and as we prepare to enter this new age, even deeper, a more complex and sophisticated understanding is required. The Abrahamic religions in their original forms have outlived themselves and can no longer provide the answers to our questions. We must turn inward to find the answers to our deepest questions, and we will find them by connecting to cosmic creation consciousness. While growing up, my parents were very involved in the Episcopal Church. I was an acolyte, an assistant to the priest, and I almost had the entire communion ceremony memorized at a young age. My upbringing was very normal for the Midwest of America, and I was taught Christianity just like everyone else in the community. As I got older, I began to question things and wanted to know more. Business trips had led me to Japan, China, Europe, and Egypt, and I was exposed to many different views and understandings. I discovered that not everyone thought the same way or believed in the same thing. There are more philosophies, beliefs, and religions than there are countries. Everywhere you go, you will find a new explanation for the meaning of life. It was fascinating to learn new things, leading me to read a book about Jesus living in India. During my stay at the Semjase Silver Star Center, I spent a lot of time reading both Billy's contact notes and several other books that I had brought with me. One of them was a book called Jesus Lived in India, that had been given to me by a friend just before I left. It was all about the life of Jesus Christ and was centered on an investigation by a German historian named Holger Kirstein, who claimed that Jesus survived the crucifixion and lived in India for many, many years afterwards. The book was his detailed report of years of research in Israel, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and India, where he had uncovered the path taken by Jesus after the crucifixion. His story told of the search he embarked upon to find out the truth about Jesus. He followed the path that Jesus had taken after the crucifixion, which led the historian through several countries where he discovered old scrolls and writings that described the man and his teachings. This book ended up with evidence to support the idea that Jesus had spent his last years in a place called Srinagar, India, where he had raised a family and passed away at a very old age. I found the book fascinating, and it was written so well, with all of his arguments so well supported, that in a court of law the author would surely win his case. Intrigued by what I read, I was anxious to find out if the Pleiadian material would either substantiate or repudiate the book. I knew that Billy had asked Semjase many questions about religion, God, and Jesus, and that he was very well informed on this subject. Since the Pleiadians have the technical ability to move in time and see history for themselves, they have the ultimate knowledge of personal experience. Whatever information they may have passed on to Billy would surely be closer to the truth than any other sources, if not the precise truth. It's quite easy to say that very few events in history have had as much impact on humanity as the life and death of Jesus. The life of Emmanuel, Yeshua, Jesus Christ. I found Billy in the kitchen having some lunch. He knew I had been reading this book for many days, and I think he was just waiting for me to show up with all my questions. I grabbed a couple of pieces of paper off the radio and sat down. I think my first question was about what Jesus really looked like, and Billy just took it from there. He started off by reminding me that Jesus was not his real name. The man we think of as Jesus was really born with the name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Throughout his lifetime, he was never called Jesus Christ. That name was given to him possibly in the year 189 AD by those who were still forming Christianity, and maybe finally cemented in the year 325 AD at the Council of Nicaea. It was also during this time that the teachings of Emmanuel were being rewritten, probably to the best of their knowledge, but there seems to be clearly some subterfuge and hidden agendas of the compilers of the New Testament. In early Christian writings, Emmanuel was spelled Emmanuel, and it still is found in many hymn books by this spelling. In the old language of the Lyrans, which is still used by the Pleiadians, the spelling was with a J, so Billy referred to him as Emmanuel, Jmmanuel. The J with the Y sound, just like in Semjase. The image most of us have of Emmanuel is that of a young man with long blonde hair, thin and small-boned, possibly blue eyes. Billy had me stand up, and taking a few seconds to think about it while looking me over, he said that Emmanuel was actually about 5'11" and weighed about 175 pounds at the time of his crucifixion. He had black, curly hair and was large-boned with big hands. His skin was tanned, and he had the look of a working man who was outside in the sun every day. His birth. The Pleiadians wanted to make it perfectly clear that Emmanuel was an earth-born human being who lived and died as all humans do. His life was that of a prophet who fought for the truth about the meaning of life. He became well educated through the wisdom of the Pleiadians, among others. Through the force and wisdom of his own spirit, he found the will to fulfill his mission and bring knowledge of humanity's intimate and permanent connection to cosmic creation consciousness. His birth had been caused by the Pleiadians at the request of Pleiadian, the last Pleiadian leader on Earth. Pleiadian wanted to return to the Pleiades to live out the rest of his days, so he decided to leave behind a prophet who could carry on the teachings of cosmic creation consciousness and the lessons of life. There were no longer any gods ruling over Earth, so Pleiadian asked for permission from the Pleiadian spiritual council to procreate the spirit of Emmanuel, and permission was granted. In Emmanuel's case, his spirit was too highly evolved to be born to normal Earth parents, so it was decided that his father would be a Pleiadian man of higher evolution. Thus, a Pleiadian man named Gabriel was chosen to be the father, and an earth woman named Mary was chosen to carry the child. She was one of the old Lyran spirits who is living on Earth, and her genetics would support the higher evolution of the incoming soul. Although we were not told the means by which Gabriel impregnated Mary, due to the other factors in his life, it would most likely have been by every normal means that all humans are created. It is also said that Gabriel explained to Mary how important it was to help with the birth of this most special soul coming in. She agreed, and the spirit of Emmanuel came into the fetus in her body. Mary at that time was betrothed to a man named Joseph, who, when hearing of this special impregnation, broke out in a rage and would have nothing to do with it. He was planning to leave Mary and cancel their wedding plans. Understanding how Joseph felt, Gabriel came to him and explained the importance of this event, and that the God that ruled over earth had commanded this event to happen, referring to Pleiadian. Joseph was a God-fearing man and calmed down and went through with his plans to wed Mary. Emmanuel was actually born in a manger, just as the Bible says, for there really was no room at the inn. Throughout his life, Emmanuel was aware of his true biological father, the Pleiadian Gabriel, who visited him on several occasions. Yeshua, Emmanuel, knew that his father was not a god, and had been ordered by the Pleiadian spiritual leaders who ruled over earth at that time to bring him into life. The knowledge of the Pleiadians was that of the heavenly gods, but they chose to merely observe, for it was the initiation of the time for the people of earth to learn self-reliance and discover their spiritual connection to cosmic creation consciousness. There would be no more heavenly gods or extraterrestrials from other planets on Earth. When Emmanuel tried to explain this through his teachings over many years, he discovered that the people of Earth had become accustomed to being ruled by a god. So the idea of taking responsibility for themselves would come very slowly. Emmanuel's birthday, by the way, is actually what we would call February 3rd. We do not know the year. Emmanuel had the special gift of seeing into the future. He was aware of what the future held for him. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And he knew that his teachings and how humanity would interpret them would be distorted. He also knew his name would be changed and how the leaders of what would become the Christian Church would call him the one and only Son of God, instead of understanding that his father was from the Pleiades and was a flesh and blood human just like all of us, and more importantly, all humanity is the son and daughters of cosmic creation consciousness. Emmanuel, Yeshua's teachings were of cosmic creation consciousness and of the eternal spirit that is a permanent part of all humans. But at a young age, he knew how humanity would attack his lessons and change them into a false religion. Humanity still needed a God to rule them. They were not ready to be responsible for themselves, and this is still lingering 2,000 years later. Too many lessons of life had to be unlearned before humanity could properly understand the teachings of Yeshua, Emmanuel. But still, even knowing the future that would come to him, Yeshua perceived that his life was very worthwhile, and his words would provide the truth which would endure for all times on earth. Eventually, Emmanuel's true teachings would once again surface in the future, serving as a guide to those who were ready to take the spiritual accountability for themselves and therefore lead the people of earth into times of peace and prosperity. Emmanuel traveled to India at an early age, 13, and began his studies there. He practiced meditation and learned the lessons of life from the great thinkers of that time. The knowledge of the East had been passed down for thousands of years, since the time of Atlantis, when it was well known that the sons and daughters from the stars populated the earth. On several occasions he was visited by his father, the Pleiadian Gabriel, who guided him and instructed him in the use of his own spiritual powers, which would serve him very well during his later life, and especially the crucifixion. Truly, he was well aware of all of the events of his future, and he felt no need to try to change them. He was born as a human being, and as such, he would live and fulfill his mission. The power of his soul could easily see into the future and allowed him to know his destiny. He knew that as a human being, he would have his bodily death at the age of 115 years old. The coming event of his crucifixion would change none of that, for the occurrence would only be bodily pain for him, which would be dispersed by the force of his inner will. Then he would finish his mission. All of the hate levied against him did not keep him from his path. The truth was more important than any pain his physical body might feel. He knew he would be tortured, but the truth and his soul would not be harmed. The writings of Emmanuel. I was interested in any teachings that Emmanuel, Yeshua, may have written in his own lifetime that the Pleiadians knew about. Growing up as a Christian, I was aware of the Gospels of Matthew and Mark and how the New Testament had been centered around them, but I wanted to know why there was not any original writings by Emmanuel, Yeshua himself, so we could know what his real thoughts were. Billy had asked these same questions of the Pleiadians and had been told that during Emmanuel's time there were very few who could read or write, so the necessity to write down his teachings was minimal. He planned to do it after the crucifixion, knowing he would survive it and return to India. In India, he had learned the lessons of spirit, and living a long and prosperous life were ahead of him. Before the crucifixion, much of his teachings were written down by a man named Judas Iscariot, who was his scribe and a very good friend, not his betrayer as is commonly taught. The Pleiadians also wanted to make it clear that these teachings were merely being handed down by Emmanuel, for he had learned them himself from his Pleiadian father, Gabriel, and the learned men of India who had taught him so well during his early years of living there. This is Crispy chiming in here. I also do believe that before the age of 13, when Emmanuel left for India, he was raised by the Essenes and taught all that they knew, much of which was based on Eastern and Indian philosophies, by the way. Back to Randy. Yeshua's teachings were written down by Judas Iscariot and buried in a safe place for the future. The writings were also added to by Yeshua, Emmanuel's son, Joseph, and they made it through the ages, so the truth would endure for posterity. Emmanuel's father, the Pleiadian Gabriel, and other Pleiadians would see to it that these writings would be found in the future and become accessible to the earth human beings. But Emmanuel, Yeshua, even knew that 2,000 years later, when those documents were found, humanity would still not be quite ready enough, and it would take many, many, many more years before the grain of truth would find enough nourishable soil. Judas was not the betrayer. Judas Iscariot was not the betrayer of Emmanuel, as we have been told over the years. One of Judas's scripts was stolen so that it could be used as evidence against Emmanuel by a Pharisee's son by the name of Judah Iscariot. He secretly stole the script from a bag of Judas Iscariot and sold it for 70 silver coins to the scribes and Pharisees who had been pursuing Emmanuel for a long time. This would enable them to accuse Emmanuel of blasphemy. Judas Iscariot would have to rewrite that text another time and preserve it well to endure. The father of the thief, Judah Iscariot, who was also a real traitor, wanted to hide his son's guilt and protect the family name. So he announced that the traitor was the scribe of Emmanuel, named Judas Iscariot. Because of his power and wealth and standing in the community, the father of Judah Iscariot's words were believed. This story also worked well for the scribes and Pharisees, as the people would now be told that someone from Emmanuel's own ranks had betrayed him and surrendered him for death on the cross. This was a complete lie. So the people would always wonder how Yeshua's, Emmanuel's own lessons could be truthful if his own follower would betray him and sell him out. The Crucifixion. Emmanuel was brought before Pontius Pilate, who did not want to sentence him, leaving it up to the people, who feverishly yelled for his blood. He was to be crucified on the cross along with 2 murderers. As the crowd yelled and screamed, he was beaten badly. Most of Emmanuel's ribs were broken, and he could not even stand up. He was not able to carry the cross, which was done by a man called Simon. At a place called Golgotha, he was nailed to the cross and then raised into the air for all to see. It was most unusual for anyone to be nailed to the cross. It was customary to be tied. But the crowd and the soldiers had been whipped into a frenzy of hate by the high priests of the Romans. Soon after Emmanuel had been put up on the cross, a terrible storm started that filled the sky with blackness that lasted for 3 hours. At the end of the storm, Emmanuel's head had fallen forward because he was in a coma, causing the soldiers to think he was dead. A lance was used to pierce his lower stomach to see if he was still alive, and when blood mixed with water came out, the soldier felt he was dead. He called out that Emmanuel was dead. In the crowd was Joseph of Arimathea, who was a follower of Emmanuel. He knew that Emmanuel was not dead, but had slipped into a coma brought on by the broken bones and the terrible beating. Joseph of Arimathea immediately asked for and received permission from Pontius Pilate to take Emmanuel down from the cross and bury him. He found some friends of Emmanuel's from India who were there, and with their help took him to Joseph's family tomb. It had a secret entrance, so he and the men from India could come and go as they pleased without being noticed by the soldiers who had been left to guard the entrance. It took 3 days for Emmanuel's health to return to the point where he could walk again. He had been nursed very well by the men from India, who had brought with them special oils and salves which helped to revive him along with their other spiritual treatments. After Emmanuel, Yeshua had left the tomb on the 3rd day through the secret back entrance. There was a great roar in the air, and a bright light appeared, out of which stepped Gabriel, Yeshua's Pleiadian father. He put the guarding soldiers to sleep, rolled back the great stone that covered the entrance, and let Emmanuel's mother, Mary, and Mary Magdalene into the tomb to see that he was gone. The Marys were told to go into the city and tell Emmanuel's disciples that his body had risen, and to meet him on the road to Galilee, but not to tell anyone else. They also did not tell the disciples that he was actually alive. Emmanuel appeared 2 more times before the disciples, once in the room where they had gathered a few days before to celebrate what is called the Last Supper, and then again on the road to Galilee. He then disappeared and was dropped off by his father in Syria, and lived in Damascus for a while without being recognized. Emmanuel and Saul. It was at this time that he was joined by his brother Thomas and his mother Mary. His brother informed him of the terrible things that were being done to his followers by Saul. Emmanuel told him not to worry, he would take care of it. Saul would later be known as Paul, and for the most part, he was responsible for the creation of Christianity. It was his understanding of Emmanuel's teachings that survived to help form the New Testament. Thomas informed Emmanuel that Saul had become a bitter enemy and was issuing threats against any who would believe in Yeshua. He was even writing letters to the synagogues in neighboring countries to find any who would follow Emmanuel's teachings so he could bring them to Jerusalem for persecution and torture. Emmanuel decided to take care of Saul himself and formed a plan. He knew that Saul was on his way to Damascus, so he planned to confront him on the road and teach him a lesson he would not forget. Since Saul and everyone else believed Emmanuel to be dead, he would think he was seeing a ghost. Emmanuel prepared some secret things, powders, salve, and liquids, and left the city and hid partway along the road to Damascus, waiting for Saul. During the night he saw a group of men approaching and could see Saul among them. Emmanuel started a fire, mixed it with his special preparation that created a tremendously bright light which blinded the group. As the smoke covered the men on the road, Emmanuel yelled out so that Saul could hear him and barely see him, but he knew it was him. Hearing the voice of Emmanuel and seeing a shadowy figure, Saul knew he was seeing his ghost and became terrified. Emmanuel continued to speak through the smoke, telling Saul to go into the city and let his disciples teach him how to live. Emmanuel then disappeared into the night and headed to Damascus. Saul and all of his men thought they'd heard Yeshua's ghost and were frozen with fear. They could not imagine how Emmanuel could be speaking to them from the grave. Scared and confused, they continued on to Damascus. A disciple of Emmanuel's preached to Saul the new teachings so that he would slowly understand. Still terrified, though, Saul was confused and therefore didn't understand very much. Saul was of the belief, as were the high priests of the time, that once you died, it was possible to resurrect the dead, but they did not believe in reincarnation. Because of that, when Saul heard the sound of Emmanuel's voice and saw the shadows and light, he thought he had been resurrected and began to use this in his teachings. This is where the idea originated that Emmanuel arose from the dead and was resurrected. Saul, of course, had no idea that Emmanuel had not died and had only tricked him. Emmanuel, his brother Thomas, his friend and scribe Judas Iscariot, and his mother then began the long trip to India. During that time he preached in many places and often had to flee because his speeches were still so revolutionary that people rejected him. That is why his journey to India took several years and was connected with hardships. In the country which today is called West Pakistan, way up in the north, near the last foothills of the western Himalaya mountains, his mother became very ill and died when Emmanuel was about 38 years old. She was buried in a little town which today is still called Mari, Pakistan. A small stone monument marks her grave where she lies. After he lost his mother, Emmanuel traveled to the area known as Kashmir, which crosses the northern part of India, where he continued to spread his teachings further. When he was about 45 years old, he married a young, pretty woman who bore him numerous offspring. Like every normal head of a family, he decided to settle down and raise his children, living in Srinagar, India, which is located in the northernmost part of the country. From there, he made many journeys and kept on preaching his new teachings. And at the age of 115, he died a natural death and was buried outside of town in a small, unmarked grave. Judas Iscariot had died at about the age of 90 and was buried at a place not far from Srinagar. The firstborn son of Emmanuel, called Yosef, wrote down his father's story and left India after his death. After a 3-year journey, he settled in Jerusalem to live out his remaining days. He brought with him the original scrolls of his father's teachings and hid them in the tomb in which Emmanuel had originally lain, owned by the family of Joseph of Arimathea. He knew this would be the safest place. The Talmud of Emmanuel. It wasn't until 1963 that the Pleiadians led a Greek Catholic priest named Rashid to the site where the scrolls were buried. The writings had been placed into resin and were kept in a crystalline box given to Emmanuel by his father, the Pleiadian Gabriel, when he was very young, just for this purpose. Written in Old Aramaic script, the scrolls were found under a large flat rock where they had been hidden almost 2,000 years earlier by Emmanuel's son, Yosef. Rashid began translating the scrolls from Aramaic into German and making copies, for he knew it would be his job to bring them to the world. The scrolls were long and contained over 120 chapters of information. So far, he had only sent 36 of them to Billy in Switzerland. Hiding out in Baghdad with his family, the good priest was being followed by assassins from both the Christian and Jewish faiths who had heard about his translations. Fleeing for his life to Lebanon, he camped there with his family in a refugee camp. But he and his family were found by the Jewish military, who attacked the camp and slaughtered most of the people there. However, Rashid and his family escaped the massacre and fled into the night, but lost all the scrolls. Shortly afterward, the priest and his family were murdered by a terrorist gang who machine-gunned them down in hatred. Only the 36 chapters which he had originally translated survived in Billy's hands. The fate of the original scrolls is unknown. However, it's quite likely they were all destroyed. The first 36 have been translated into English and today are available in a small book called The Talmud of Emmanuel. Published by Wildflower Press in America, it also comes with a companion book called Celestial Teachings, written by Dr. James Deardorff, a Christian historian. This book is the result of 6 years of study of the Talmud of Emmanuel to determine its validity. The Lord's Prayer. In school and in church, most of us learned what we were told was the Lord's Prayer. In the Talmud of Emmanuel, we read it in a slightly different way. Emmanuel was trying to teach those around him how to become aware of their spirit within and their connection to cosmic creation consciousness. No one quite understood the concept of meditation that he was trying to teach them, but instead they thought it was a prayer to God to help them. What we know as the Lord's Prayer was distorted. The version written down in the Talmud of Emmanuel is a meditation called My Spirit. Here it is, in its original form, taken from the Talmud of Emmanuel, reprinted with permission from the publisher. My Spirit. My Spirit, you are omnipotent, unlimited, and eternal. Your name is sacred, holy, and divine. May your kingdom be incarnated in me and through me. May your power reveal itself within me, on earth and in the heavens. Give me today my daily bread, and thus let me recognize my needs, as I shall recognize the truth. Allow me to not be led into temptation and confusion, and deliver me from error. For yours is the kingdom within me, and the power and knowledge forever. Amen.